Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Gen X Dad and his Gen Z Teens podcast. Today, I want to talk about something that sounds pretty simple but can be surprisingly difficult to actually do. That is, taking the long view. In other words, learning to look beyond whatever is happening to us right now and remembering that life is a very long story. I think this is especially difficult when we are in the middle of something stressful. When something goes wrong, it can feel like that moment is everything. You have a bad day at work, and suddenly you start wondering if your entire career is headed in the wrong direction. You have a problem with a friend or a relationship, and it can feel like everything is falling apart. You get rejected from a college, miss an opportunity, make a mistake, or have some financial setback, and suddenly the future looks a whole lot darker than it did yesterday. But here's something I have learned with age. Most of the things that feel enormous today eventually become much smaller parts of the overall story. Think about your own life for a moment. I bet there are things that happened 5 or 10 years ago that seemed absolutely devastating at the time. Maybe you lost a job. Maybe a relationship ended. Maybe you made a decision that you deeply regretted. Maybe something you really wanted did not work out. At the time, you probably could not imagine being okay with it. Yet here you are. You survived it. You moved forward. And in some cases, that thing that seemed like a disaster actually opened the door to something better. That does not mean we should ignore problems or pretend everything is going to work out perfectly. Taking the long view is not about being blindly optimistic. It is about putting today's circumstances into their proper place. A bad day is not necessarily a bad life. A bad semester is not a bad education. A failed relationship does not mean you will never find love. A career setback does not mean your career is over. One mistake does not get to define an entire lifetime. The reason this is so difficult is because our brains naturally pay attention to what is happening right now. Immediate problems demand immediate attention. The bill that needs to be paid today feels more important than the retirement account we are building over the next 30 years. The uncomfortable conversation we need to have today feels more important than the relationship we are trying to preserve for the next 20 years. The workout we do not feel like doing today feels less important than the health we are trying to maintain for decades. We tend to value immediate comfort over future benefits. That is one of the great challenges of being an adult. Sometimes the right decision is uncomfortable today because it is going to make life better tomorrow. That is where taking the long view becomes incredibly powerful. Think about education. If you're a teenager or young adult, 4 years can feel like an eternity. Spending several years learning something, earning a degree, developing skills, and figuring out what you want to do can seem like a huge investment. But when you look at your entire adult life, 4 years is actually a very small amount of time. The same thing applies to building a career, getting into shape, saving money, or developing a meaningful relationship. We sometimes give up because we are judging progress over weeks when we should be judging it over years. The same lesson applies to us as parents. We can become frustrated because our kids are not making the decisions we think they should be making. We can worry about a particular grade, a particular choice, or a particular phase they are going through. But parenting is a long game. Our job is not to make sure our kids make every decision correctly. Our job is to help them develop the ability to make good decisions for themselves over the course of their lives. That brings me to another important part of taking the long view. We need to be patient with ourselves. We are often much harder on ourselves than we would ever be on somebody else. We look at where we are today and compare ourselves to where we think we should be. We see the money we have not saved, the goals we have not accomplished, the pounds we have not lost, and the skills we have not developed, or the opportunities we think we have missed. But life is not a race against some imaginary schedule. You can change direction at 30. You can start something new at 40. You can reinvent yourself at 50. You can decide that something is no longer working and make a different choice. The long view reminds us that we have more time than we sometimes think we do. It also reminds us that the good times deserve perspective too. When things are going well, enjoy them, appreciate them. But remember that circumstances change. A great period of life will eventually give way to another period. That is not something to fear. It is simply how life works. The long view gives us patience when things are difficult and humility when things are going well. So the next time something happens that feels like the end of the world, take a step back and ask yourself one simple question. Will this still matter 5 years from now? Maybe it will. Some things genuinely do have long-term consequences, but many things will not. And even when something does matter, the way you respond to it today can influence where you end up tomorrow. That is really the point. We cannot control everything that happens in our lives. We cannot prevent every disappointment, setback, failure, or difficult season. What we can control is whether we allow one moment to become our entire definition of the future. Life is a long story. Do not let one difficult paragraph convince you that you know how the story ends. Take the long view. Keep moving forward. Give yourself some patience. Make decisions today that your future self will appreciate. And most importantly, remember that you are still writing the story. I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Gen X Dad and his Gen Z Teens podcast. I'll see you next time.